warn you, and let me warn the nation against the smooth evasion that says, of course we believe these things. We believe in social security. We believe in work for the unemployed. We believe in saving homes. Cross our hearts and hope to die. We believe in all these things. But we do not like the way the present administration is doing them.
Franklin Roosevelt entered presidential politics at a time of great disarray. The Great Depression was in full swing, and Herbert Hoover had done little to dampen its blow to the American economy. Before the presidential election, FDR had to fight his way through a close primary by unifying a split Democratic Party. Catholicism and Prohibition were issues of major contention. Vying for the candidacy, along with Roosevelt, were Speaker of the House John Nance Garner of Texas, who had support in the West, and the party's 1928 candidate, Alfred Smith, who had support in the urban Northeast. In the end, FDR was unable to claim 2/3 of the vote, but still managed to attain the Democratic nomination by offering Garner the vice presidency. Breaking tradition, he traveled to Chicago to accept the nomination. This acceptance capped off a brilliant campaign by the Democrats, and Roosevelt won in a landslide. His victory in 1932 was the first of 4, each of which were characterized by the new FDR coalition, a group of diverse voters who Roosevelt had successfully pulled towards the Democratic Party. This coalition combined Southern Protestants, Northern Jews, Catholics and blacks from urban areas, labor union members, small farmers in the Midwest, and of course liberals. During his time in office, Roosevelt had historically long coattails. His victories helped to sweep Democrats into a wide range of offices, claiming large majorities in both the House and Senate. After the 1936 election, it was clear the Democratic Party was now the majority party in the nation. As president, Roosevelt tried to lead by example. He exuded optimism and constantly expressed confidence in his long stream of legislation. Although predominantly Democratic, FDR's cabinet was composed of individuals with varying ideological and political standing. This variety provided a wide array of options when deciding what to do next. Gaining perspective from all facets of his own party allowed Roosevelt to represent and unify the Democrats as a whole, a truly amazing feat when considering their previous divisions.
This is preeminently the time to speak the truth frankly and boldly, nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Immediately following his inauguration in 1933, Franklin Roosevelt began creating bills in order to provide relief for the crippled economy. The first 100 days of his presidency saw a record number of bills sent to Congress. These bills were called the New Deal. This New Deal included the Emergency Banking Act, which restored the public's trust in the banking system by requiring banks to be approved by the Federal Reserve. The 1933 Banking Act, also known as the Glass-Steagall Act, created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and insured all bank deposits less than $2,500 per account holder. The Civilian Conservation Corps hired 250,000 young men to work on rural construction projects, including bridges, flood control, and fire prevention. The young men were paid $30 a month, 25 of which was sent home to their parents. The National Industrial Recovery Act, NIRA, attempted to create industry-wide labor standards among the railroad, steel, and electricity corporations. This bill was later found to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court due to the vagueness of the wording in the law. FDR created the Tennessee Valley Authority, the largest government-owned corporation in history, in order to modernize the rural Tennessee River Valley by building dams and power plants. Following the 1934 midterm elections, the Democrats took majority in both houses of Congress. As a result, FDR began his so-called Second New Deal. The series of bills was focused on preventing another collapse. It included the Social Security Act, which created the modern Social Security system, as well as the Wagner Act, which guaranteed workers the right to form unions and the right to collectively bargain.
Our dollar is now altogether too much influenced by the internal policies of other nations. Therefore, the United States must take firmly in its own hands the control of the gold value of our dollar. And as a further effective means to that end, I am going to establish a government market for gold in the United States.
FDR utilized his executive powers early in his first term. In 1933, he issued Executive Order 6073, which reopened the banks that he had closed for his so-called bank holiday. That same year, he issued Executive Order 6102, which took the U.S. off the gold standard and criminalized the possession of monetary gold. This was intended to stabilize the economy by preventing people from holding on to their money and to prevent the Great Depression from carrying on for another decade. This order, in tandem with the reopening of federal banks, led to more than $600 million in the form of gold and gold certificates to be returned to the Federal Reserve banks. A majority of FDR's other executive orders established New Deal agencies. Executive Orders 6101, 7034, 7075, and many others pushed to create the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, National Recovery Administration, and many others. These all aimed to create jobs for the unemployed and to ease people through the Great Depression. During wartime, FDR issued Executive Order 9066, which allowed the relocation of Japanese Americans to internment camps. FDR signed this in the wake of an attack on Pearl Harbor. Germans and Italians were also targeted by this, but to not the scale at which the Japanese were. An estimated 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned in war relocation camps.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
As Commander-in-Chief, FDR wanted to have an active role in world affairs, but was constrained by the isolationist views of Congress and the public. His ability to take action in foreign affairs was also restricted by the Great Depression and his need to focus on solving economic problems. Early in his career as president, Roosevelt sought to continue the implementation of the Good Neighbor policy, the goal of which was to improve relations with Latin America. However, as tensions rose in Europe and Asia, FDR quickly turned his sights towards strengthening ties with the Soviet Union. Roosevelt believed that were war to break out, the USSR would be a powerful ally. This worried many Americans, the majority of whom still supported an isolationist stance. To appease the general populace, Roosevelt signed the First Neutrality Act on August 31, 1935. This act was tested time and time again as foreign tempers flared. Even in 1937, when a Japanese aircraft bombed and sank the American gunboat Panay, Congress and the public restrained Roosevelt from involving the United States. When war began, FDR, determined to help Western allies, used indirect actions such as providing economic and military aid to Britain and imposing trade restrictions on Japan. But his and the country's hand was forced when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941. On December 8th, FDR, with congressional approval, declared war. After the introduction of American troops, the Axis powers began a steady decline until their eventual dissolution. At the Yalta Conference in 1945, Roosevelt met with Stalin and Churchill to determine the fate of the defeated Germans. Attending the Yalta Conference turned out to be one of the final things he would do as president. On April 12, 1945, Roosevelt died of a stroke at his house in Georgia. Franklin Roosevelt would be considered an imperial president. Because he commanded public opinion by such a large margin, fellow Democratic candidates in Congress could ride his coattails into office. This allowed FDR to demand favors of the newly elected congressmen. By imposing himself in this way, Roosevelt commanded the Democratic majorities in both the House and Senate, making it easy for him to drive his party in a direction that coincided with his own personal ideals.
He was an imperial president. However, he was not imperial with respect to his role as chief legislator. As defined by the Constitution, the role of chief legislator allows the president to propose bills to Congress, as well as to veto any that he does not deem fit. He did not overstep the role as defined within the Constitution, despite the vast amount of bills he introduced. The bills created widespread reform on a previously unimaginable level. The Social Security Act is a good example of this.
FDR, as the chief executive, was an imperial president. His New Deal executive orders extended the government's control over private industry. And after some of his New Deal policies were struck down, he tried to pack the Supreme Court with more judges that would favor his New Deal policies.
When it comes to his role as Commander-in-Chief, FDR was truly an imperial president. Rallying support from Congress, Roosevelt was able to provide direct aid to allies through the Lend-Lease Act, all while increasing the military budget. FDR implemented a peacetime draft, and when war began, cracked down on belligerent nations like Japan. As World War II came to an end on the European front, FDR made important strides towards the formation of the United Nations, an organization that would hope to prevent future wars.